Hello, friends, and welcome to episode 691 of the Juicebox Podcast. Erica Forsyth is back today. She is a licensed marriage and family therapist who has had type 1 diabetes for over 30 years. You can catch Erica on episode 407, Emotions at Diagnosis and Diabetes Distress, episode 445, Supporting Caregivers, episode 473, Sneaking Food, episode 479, Teen Talk, episode 514, Sharing the Care of a Type 1 Child, episode 576, Hard Type 1 Questions from Kids, and episode 659, Burnout. Today, episode 691 is about mom guilt. And I have the mom in quotes because it's really about guilt for both parents and adults living with type 1. Please remember while you're listening that nothing you hear on the Juicebox Podcast should be considered advice, medical or otherwise. Always consult a physician before making any changes to your healthcare plan or becoming bold with insulin. I have a couple more little announcements here after the music, and then we're going to get right to Erica. This show is sponsored today by the glucagon that my daughter carries, Gvoke HypoPen. Find out more at gvokeglucagon.com/juicebox. The podcast is also sponsored by the Contour Next One blood glucose meter. You can learn more about Arden's blood glucose meter at contournext.com/juicebox. And today's podcast is also sponsored by US Med. Get your diabetes supplies at usmed.com/juicebox or by calling 888-721-1514. Recording. Here we go. So we are recording now, so you know. And just give me any words. I can make sure you're on.
Okay. Good morning.
Perfect.
Or good afternoon.
Yeah. Erica, you and I are doing something. I don't usually let people in on this. This is going to be an episode that gets recorded and posted in the same 12 hours.
Ooh, that's exciting.
Because today is May 30th, tomorrow May 31st, the last day of Mental Health Awareness Month.
That's right.
Right. So we didn't do that on purpose, but hey, what the heck? Let's act like we did and put this out. But I think people who listen know that I'm not the guy who's like, it's Father's Day, do Father's Day stuff. But this just worked out really well. And
it did.
I have a topic that I sent you. I forget how I asked you. I was like, is this a real thing? Like, something that doctors believe in? Because I think mom guilt's a real thing, and I want to talk about it. And you were really open to the discussion, so I appreciate that very much.
Yes, and I think it is a real thing. I think we could open it even further to mom guilt, dad guilt, or caregiver guilt. Just because that's where we are in our, day and age.
Yeah, no, I think that too. Like, I am interested if it's something that strikes females differently or harder, but I don't know if that's something you can quantify or not. And, I've been a stay-at-home dad forever. I think I quit my job a couple of months before a month or two before my son was actually born in 2000. So this is my 22nd year of being a stay-at-home dad. I guess technically I'm more of a podcaster now, but that's not really the point. And I felt the pain, but I've been much more able to just not give over to it as much. Mm-hmm. And I am wondering if that's person to person. I'm endlessly fascinated with people's mental health and why decisions get made or why things happen that aren't even decisions. So let me first ask you, do you think that there is some sort of physiological change that happens when you become a parent?
Yes, I couldn't probably speak to all of the science behind it. But I think just naturally, everything changes in terms of how you spend your day, your time, your focus, your priority. And I think that happens for, all genders. I think your initial question of, is it, are women or moms more prone to it. I would say probably due to gender stereotypes or gender role expectations. Stereotypically, moms may do better at that, so to speak,
Yeah.
but I think it can definitely both moms and dads or any caregiver can experience this type of guilt.
I know this is not your area of expertise, but do you think hormones have any impact on it for women?
I don't know. That's a great question.
I don't know either.
We'll have to dig into that one.
The only thing I could tell you for sure is that when we had our son pretty young, I don't know how much I talk about this. Like, my wife was, I think, 22 when we got married.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that was in 1996. And 4 years later, look at me. I was like, oh, when was that? And 4 years later in 2000, Cole was born. So we were married 4 years or so. But Kelly was still just like 26. And not that she wasn't always, Kelly's always sort of been like a hardworking, mature person. I don't know another way to put that. But she really was, when I met her, a person who's like, I'm going to grow up. I'm going to go to college. I'm going to go to New York. I'm going to work. I'm going to have a white sofa. Like, you know what I mean? Like, I'm going to live by myself. And even when we were married in the first few years, I mean, that's pretty much how she was. And right now, she's downstairs. And if you said anything bad to my children or about my children, she'd get a bat and beat you to death with it. So I don't know what happened to her. But it happened. It felt pretty instant.
Mm-hmm.
It really did to me. It felt instant.
And I think is that maternal, paternal instinct taking over? Is that related to hormones? Maybe, I don't know. I can't speak to that specifically, but I think it is just, I think we're just talking about caregiving in general, just this natural, protective, instinctive response that we have when we have children, and regardless of however we have them, whether it's biological, adoptive, all the different ways that one can become a caregiver.
So you become, I mean, obviously, listen, we're not saying anything that's hard to understand, but babies are helpless and they're yours. You feel a connection to them, hopefully right away or at some point. I mean, I'm sure there are some people who never connect with their kids. I've seen it happen. It's sad, but generally speaking, for the most part, you have this feeling of, I have to protect this thing. I have to make sure it's happy. I have to make sure it's safe. I have to make sure it grows up well and has opportunities. And you have all these like crazy feelings. And you could be in another situation, by the way. You could be in a depressed situation financially where your focus is more about, I have to get this kid food. I have to find a way to give them clothes and shoes or whatever it ends up being. Is it when you perceive a failure that the guilt hits?
Well, yes, I would say when you perceive a failure, and I think it's important to differentiate between guilt and shame here, because guilt is, and Brene Brown, who I'm sure I'll mention more than once on this podcast, she has a lot of books and TED Talks around this topic, around the difference between guilt and shame. And guilt is more a response to the behavior. Like I did something bad in terms of, if we're talking about, mom guilt. I did something bad. I didn't do this well. I didn't spend enough time with my child. I wasn't able to give them enough food. I wasn't able to sign them up for all the activities I wanted to because of finances. That is a response, feeling badly or wishing things were different in response to behavior. That is the guilt feeling, which often can be like productive in some cases, because then if you're aware, you can make changes. Shame is when let's say you're experiencing guilt because, quote, you did something bad. Shame is then, I am bad. I am not a good enough mom. I'm not a good enough parent. I'm a terrible person. And so that, I think it's just important to kind of differentiate those two things before we move forward.
Okay.
Can
an outside force, take shame and make it into guilt for you, or guilt make it into shame for you? I'm trying to find a I wish I was smarter in this moment, Erica, but I'm trying to find
Well,
an
no,
example.
I think the easiest one would be social media or influence or even a family member. Let's say the easiest kind of example that comes to mind, because I am a working mother, is, you don't spend enough time with your children and you're feeling guilty about that because you're trying to find the quote work-life balance, which is kind of a funny saying in and of itself. But and then maybe you post something about that guilt on social media, trying to either be comforted or maybe to feel less lonely, because it can be a very isolated and very common experience. I also think we need to normalize it. Most parents can feel guilt from time to time, and that's normal, and you're not alone in that. But let's say you're feeling that guilt and you're either talking about it with a family member or you're posting something about it on social media, and then you get either attacked or shamed, like, you should be staying home more. Why aren't you, or, why are you working so much? Or really, you should cut down on those hours so you can be at your child's soccer games. Those types of comments can definitely help you lead the shame if you are looking for that and susceptible to that type of feedback.
So somebody could somebody could shame you about something you feel guilt about.
Yes.
And then you could then transition, or I guess duplicate. You could probably split off and feel both things all of a sudden. Like, you already felt guilty, now you're ashamed of it.
Absolutely. And then you're in a kind of this shame spiral. And I think we can get to, how to help yourself in that moment. But I think having that initial awareness of, oh, I'm feeling guilty. This is a normal feeling as a parent. And then either reflecting back, okay, maybe I could find some ways to be, at home more present when I am home. And maybe it's putting your phone down by the front door, whatever it may be. But then when you lead into shame, we're like, oh my gosh, I'm such a bad parent because I was talking about this with my aunt and she's made these comments and I'm never going to be the parent that she was. Those, it's all kind of in your narrative, your self-talk, right? As to how far and how deep you can go into that shame. Yeah. But it can be influenced and exaggerated by outside forces, as you say.
Why? I don't know. It's a big question I'm about to ask with no answer, but let me say it a different way. In your example, you go online, you make this statement, hey, this happened. I wish I could have done better. There are a number of people who will come in and support you, right? People say, it's okay. Cut yourself a break. What do I hear people say all the time? Give yourself some grace, things like that. Mm-hmm. But then there's anger. People are either supportive or angry. Are the angry people just protecting themselves from feeling guilty about something that they're keeping under the surface? Like, why would you lash out at a person for saying, I need help? I don't understand that.
Without knowing their own individual psyche and experience and trauma, oftentimes kind of the quote bullying behavior online could be stemming from one person's own shame. And they are trying to alleviate some of that, or kind of discharge some of that, so to speak, onto the other person. So I get to shame you because that's the only way I know how to make myself feel better.
Yeah, I see it as them protecting their own psyche, the attacker. And sometimes I see it as they believe it works for them, and they're trying to tell you, hey, look, just push through, push it down. Don't think about it. You'll be okay. I also want to say, on a side note, if you ever write an article about your time with me, I think you should title it Without Knowing, because it's the... It's the phrase you use most when I ask you open-ended questions that have no real answer. You go, well, without knowing the details.
Because I never want to assume.
I know. That's why I like you. Every time I hear you say that, I think Eric is the right person for being on the podcast.
That's so funny. I'm glad you pointed that out. Now I'll have to be extra aware of how often I use that.
Oh, no. You should keep saying it.
Keep saying it. Okay.
Yeah, it's how I know I've reached a line. I hear without knowing as, well, gee, Scott, why don't you ask another question that has 73 answers and just generalize the hell out of this whole thing? But I'm just going by what I see most. I mean, I run a really huge Facebook group. And I hate to say it, but at this point, I read people's posts and I think, oh, this is that one. They actually fit into categories. I could probably make a chart of about 20 things that people post online about and drop most people's posts into those categories. And it happens. An example would be if someone comes online to ask a question about getting some sort of an accessibility pass for a theme park, I can, in my sleep with my eyes closed, tell you exactly how that thread is going to go. I know exactly who will. I know that some people will give you good factual information about it. Some people will come in to support you, and they seem like they're just, this is a great moment for them to feel like, oh, I got one of those passes one time. I'm glad I'm not I'm not a loser. You know what I mean? Like, other people need this too. There are angry people that come in to say that you're not disabled. I'm not disabled. I have type 1. I mean, I swear to you, it plays like a song that I've heard 1,000 times. But always different people.
Yes. Well, it's so interesting because in anticipation of our chat today, I went onto your Facebook page and searched for posts that had the word guilt in it. And happily, I only spent a few minutes looking at this, but there were so many wonderful, encouraging comments, which, decreases the isolation of the poster's experience of guilt, encouraging, sharing their moments of, the me too. I felt this way. I did not come across any, shaming posts, but I imagine they might be out there.
So
I know you're really good about regulating that as
funny,
well in your page.
What's really funny, Eric, is that I put no effort into regulating my page.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So where it comes from is that if it should happen, I don't just block somebody. I don't kick them out. I talk to them right there in front of everyone. And I say, and then you teach the group that here the expectation is you're going to be helpful to people.
Yes.
And if you're going to be sharp-tongued, it better be helpful, it better be purposeful, and it better not be in anger or just because you're out there trolling the internet trying to get into a fight with somebody. And you get this sort of, I say this about diabetes, but I'm starting to get what I expect in my Facebook group, because there's a core somewhere of initial listeners who wanted a Facebook group. People who said, hey, we want a private place to go to talk about what we hear on the podcast. And there were enough people there that it built a community in the likeness of the vibe of the podcast. It's really wonderful. I can't take credit for it. It just happened. But yeah, I don't know. I don't mess around. Like I don't know. I don't feel weird about stuff like that. I mean, this stuff in general, there's something that happened in our life around diabetes recently that is so fresh. I'm not actually going to share it on the podcast yet. Okay. But it was a situation where I could have felt guilty. And something happened. I was the gatekeeper of a good or bad decision. I made a bad decision with probably good reasons. I'll explain it one day on the podcast. I did the wrong thing, and it led to a problem. And everything that happened after that is my fault. It just was. But I was able to step back after the initial thing happened and say to myself, I didn't give my kid diabetes. I'm not the one that made insulin work like this. I'm not the one that none of this is me. I'm in a bad situation, doing the best I can. I'm not a perfect person. I wasn't perfect today. I did rebound quickly and pull it back together. But I never let myself feel guilty about it. And I was not ashamed of what I did. And I don't know why I can do that and other people get run over by these things.
Well, probably just as we've talked about in other episodes, you're kind of how you're wired, and your self-talk and your resilience. I did notice, like, as you mentioned, you did not create diabetes, in Arden, and there was nothing that you could or could not do to prevent her from getting it. And I did notice was, as I searched for, guilt in the Facebook group, that was obviously the initial guilt that a caregiver might experience is this: what did I do? What did I not do? How did my child get this type of guilt?
Mm-hmm.
And I think then you go through a period of time where you learn and you have more education around diabetes, psychoeducation around kind of what can you manage, what can you not manage.
Mm-hmm.
And then I think where you were going also is this idea of, perfection, this expectation of perfection, that we are human and we are going to make mistakes. We're talking about in general, mom guilt, but then with this diabetes aspect, you cannot expect perfection, because then that leads to the guilt and all of the feelings around shame. And then you don't want to pass that on either to your child, because you're trying to model that. So you have that pressure as well.
Gvoke HypoPen has no visible needle and is a premixed autoinjector of glucagon for treatment of very low blood sugar in adults and kids with diabetes ages 2 and above. Find out more. Go to gvokeglucagon.com/juicebox. Gvoke shouldn't be used in patients with insulinoma or pheochromocytoma. Visit gvokeglucagon.com/risk. You never know when you're going to need your blood glucose meter. Many of you may have CGMs and many of you may not. But a staple of living with insulin is having an accurate, reliable blood glucose meter. And the Contour Next one is that meter. Head over to contournext.com/juicebox right now to learn about the meter that my daughter carries. It is, I'll give it to you in a nutshell. It's small, but not so small that you can't hold it. The screen is bright and easy to read. The light for nighttime viewing of your blood drop is super bright. The test strips offer second chance testing, so if you kind of hit the blood or half hit it and don't get quite enough, you're able to go back and get the rest without diminishing the accuracy of the test or wasting the strip. This is incredibly important. If you want, you can pair the meter to an app on your iPhone or Android to give you even more of an insight about your diabetes. contournext.com/juicebox. Head over there now. Get started with what is just the best meter experience I've ever had while being the parent of someone with type 1. There are links in the show notes or links at juiceboxpodcast.com to Gvoke HypoPen, the Contour Next One blood glucose meter, and US Med, the place where I just got Arden's Omnipod 5 from. usmed.com/juicebox or call 888-721-1514. You do that. You go to the link or you call the number. You want to ask about a free benefits check. Find out if US Med can help you get your diabetes supplies. And I hope they can, because you're going to love it. An A+ rating with a Better Business Bureau. They accept Medicare nationwide. They accept over 800 private healthcare insurances. They carry everything from blood glucose meters to insulin pumps, diabetes testing supplies, CGMs, the whole kit and caboodle. They got it over there at US Med. You want to go to the place who served 1 million people with diabetes since 1996 and always provides 90 days worth of supplies? And those supplies get to you fast and free. That's fast and free shipping. You want US Med. usmed.com/juicebox. 888-721-1514. There are links in the show notes of your podcast player or links at juiceboxpodcast.com to all of these sponsors and the ones you haven't even heard about today. You need a link for Dexcom or Omnipod? Same place. They're all right there. I make it nice and easy for you to support the podcast and to help yourself by getting great technology, supplies, and services that will make your life with type 1 diabetes or type 2 diabetes just a little bit easier. We're going to get back to Erica now. Just remember, when you support the sponsors, you're supporting the show, and that I really appreciate it. Thank you so much. Links at juiceboxpodcast.com, links in the show notes of your podcast player, or go to gvokeglucagon.com/juicebox, usmed.com/juicebox, and contournext.com/juicebox. I just saw somebody the other day who had an illness, probably lifelong, that they were unaware of. And now it's caused a real problem for them. And what struck me about it was that for decades, they didn't know this thing was happening. So they couldn't feel guilty about it while it was happening. They couldn't feel pressure about it. But with diabetes, you immediately are made aware that less than perfect blood sugars are going to lead at some point to some sort of a deficit somewhere. Like you're not, you know what I mean? Like diabetes is one of those things that most of us are not getting out of unscathed somehow. And on top of that, you might be one of the lucky ones who have multiple autoimmune issues. And I think when people are first diagnosed, there's this feeling that if I just do this perfectly, yes, it's going to be a pain and we're going to have to do insulin and we're going to have to be careful and etc. But the outcome for my kid or for me is going to be exactly the same as if I never had diabetes. And I just don't think that that's a realistic goal. I think you can and will mitigate things. And I think that it's very possible for, especially with today's technology, for people to live pretty free of complications. But it's going to happen to somebody. And it's not your fault. Do you know what I mean? Like not everybody's prepared to do this thing the same way, but everybody gets the guilt. It doesn't matter how well they're doing. I swear to you, Erica, most of the emails I get are from people with 6 A1Cs who are killing themselves that it's not a 5-4. It's never from somebody who has a 9 that wants a 6.
Right. So then what is their expectation? The amount of pressure they're putting on themselves, is that realistic? Are they experiencing lack of sleep, stress? What's the general functioning? And maybe they can do all that and they're succeeding in life. But that just feels like a lot of hard work.
And is it really, I mean, isn't it obvious that when you put so much effort into one thing, there's not enough time or bandwidth to put that effort into other places?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Right.
I mean, I think they're also just to be mindful of, the seasons of living with type 1. I think the way you respond and feel like you need to do all the things that you should and could be doing to control it as the caregiver for your child. I think it ebbs and flows. And so I think just being mindful of that too, the post-diagnosis, trauma, and then there's the transitions and your child going through puberty and then off to high school, off to college. I think there are different seasons too, where maybe as a caregiver, you experience higher levels of guilt and pressure as there's a new chapter unfolds with the care.
So how do you, is there a way to give the guilt away? Can you get rid of it? Or are some people just, well, you know what? I'm going to ask a different question and then I'll ask about getting rid of the guilt. Do some people lean into it? Is that like a martyr complex? Or are those things not connected?
That's a good question. I feel like if you're leaning into the guilt, I think there's a healthy level, right, to responding to that guilt, because if you are doing something, quote, bad or wrong, or you're making a mistake and you're feeling that gut feeling of guilt, I think it's a healthy response to be aware of that and check it and say, okay, well, maybe we could have corrected this way this time. And I'm going to do that. And then I'm going to move forward and not kind of sit and swim in that guilt. Because then you're flirting with all the shame. I think if you're leaning into it over and over, I would be curious as to what are you getting out of that type of behavior? What's the function?
Right.
Are you getting the love that you feel like you want, or attention from family members? Are you posting frequently about your guilt on social media and you're needing that connection? I think that's all really normal now and again. But I think just having that awareness piece of why are you leaning into that? What are you getting out of that? And is that healthy?
Could it be, could it be learned or generational? What do I mean? You, I'll use myself as an
Yes.
example, right? Like you can, right? Because like for instance, like, I grew up in a blue collar household. Expectations were you'd have a blue collar job. I never once thought I wouldn't. I never once thought I wouldn't. I ended up working in a sheet metal shop. I did a laborer's job like my father did. My mom was a cashier, you know what I mean, in a place. She didn't have a very high level position. I was doing what I was expected to do. And not that there's anything wrong with those jobs, and I really don't mean that, but I didn't fit there, but yet that's right where I went. I got what I expected. And it wasn't until maybe it was guilt. Maybe I felt badly for doing something I knew I shouldn't be doing. I don't know. But I realized one day, I was like, I have to go. I think there's more for me, or something different, even not even more. Like, I just don't think I fit here, and I'm going to go find out where I fit. And I was able to get to that. But there are plenty of other people who get put into situations over and over again, generationally. You see generational wealth discrepancies, health discrepancies, right? People just get caught in a loop. And if you grew up with a mom who guilted you, and she grew up with a mom that guilted you, is there any way that you're not going to guilt yourself once something like this happens?
But yes, there is a way. I think the pattern is certainly can be learned, and it's being modeled for you. And that's how you see, if you're seeing your parent respond to that kind of psychological discomfort, and he or she's verbalizing out loud how bad she is, and she's never going to be good enough. That is probably, you might replicate that type of behavior when you feel like you've done something wrong. Of course, that can be corrected by, I know I go back, the first step is just having that awareness. Like, oh my gosh, this is what I do when I feel like I do something wrong. I feel badly, and then I shame myself, and I want to stop that. And so the self-awareness piece is huge. And being open to that if people are reflecting that to you.
Yeah. Your point about the modeling things, I have two younger brothers. One is 5 years younger than me. One is 10 years younger than me. The one who's 5 years younger has a job that's more blue collar and labor-like. And that's the kind of job I had when he went out into the world as an adult. And I was basically a father figure. By the time my youngest brother went out into the world, I had a more white collar job, and he has a more white collar job. And I wonder, excuse me, I banged into the microphone, which is not something I normally do. I sometimes wonder if it wasn't that idea. Like, oh, here are the other options that exist. I'll go follow one of those. Sometimes just knowing that it's possible, which is why I like doing an episode like this. I like people being able to hear that it's actually possible for you not to feel this way, and for you not to, keep the cycle going. And it's a kind of like a trite thing to say at this point. It's been overused, but you can be the one who stops it. And I think if you're the parent of someone with type 1, or, somebody with another issue, there could possibly be no more important time to stop it, because you were just guilted and your pancreas worked. You know what I mean? Like your kid, if you pass this on to your kid, there are going to be other issues, and they're going to be a lot more serious than just how you feel in your head, I think.
And yes, and I think, as a caregiver of a child with type 1, I think to expect that it will happen. You will make mistakes, and you will probably feel guilty about it. And that's okay too, that it's not this abnormal, wrong response. And so when you are experiencing that, to say, oh, okay, this is normal. I'm not alone. And I'm going to learn, and I'm going to kind of course correct or gather more data to figure out how to whatever it is, do it differently next time. And then the thoughts end there. And I think being aware also, if you're susceptible to the outside influences, maybe it's not appropriate to go post about that, or to unless you feel like it's a safer, smaller, or you're that it's going to be a safer response. I think just being aware of who are you going to go tell and talk to about that feeling of guilt, being aware of that.
Yeah.
If you're susceptible to the influences. Yeah.
Okay. Before we move on, I just want to be clear that the episode's going to be called Mom Guilt because I think it's what people think of, but I don't believe it's gender specific. I think dads feel just as guilty that if you grew up with your grandmother and she was your custodian, she feels just as guilty. He, she, I don't think it matters, honestly.
Yeah. And I think as we mentioned in the beginning, it doesn't matter. We all, as human beings, experience it. I probably use she because I'm a she. I just refer to that. Yeah.
I just want to make, because I don't know, I'm thinking about it as we're getting ready to move into kind of the second half of the recording. And I'm just thinking, I want to be really clear. I think there are things that I feel guilty about. I process it differently though. And I don't know if I'm actually giving it away and just getting rid of it out into the ether, or if I hide it differently, or if it comes out differently. Like, I have no idea. I think the most fascinating thing about us is we really don't know why we're doing what we're doing. Like, everybody feels like, and I think that's why it's weird to talk about fixing these things or making them better, because all these things happen so kind of invisibly. And then suddenly something in your life triggers you into thinking, wow, I have to not do this. And then now all of a sudden you're trying to consciously stop a thing that kind of subconsciously happened. And those seem like two worlds that don't overlap for some reason to me.
Right. And it is such an internal process that happens so quickly. I think before you know it, you could be in a living and breathing shame, which could then, it can affect your, overall mental health. If left unchecked, it can, prevent you from connecting with your children or other family members or friends.
Yeah.
And so I think I appreciate, that we're focusing on this too, because it's just so common and so normal.
Mm-hmm. I think too, you can see people sometimes in an attempt to get rid of their guilt or shame, they just go the opposite way too far to like apathy, and they just decide they don't care about anything. And the way that I won't feel badly about it is if I don't care about it.
Yes.
And that's just probably more dangerous, because you've said a number of times, guilt's actually kind of valuable. It really is. I don't even know if, listen, I don't even know if there's not a function for shame sometimes. You know what I'm saying? If you're deep enough in a hole, I don't know how you get out of it. Like, do you sometimes need someone to look at you and go, hey, you got to pull it together? I don't know. I have no idea. Maybe it works for some people. It doesn't work for other people. You hear people say that they feel shamed about their bodies, but then other people will tell you, I was in poor health until a friend of mine came along and pushed me in a way that I don't think society would have been comfortable with, but here I am and I'm better. So I don't know what the hell the answer is. I have no idea. I just think that if you're hearing this and you've felt this guilt, especially around diabetes, it's just very important I would think, to say out loud or write down on a piece of paper or share with a friend that this is not my fault. I didn't do this. I didn't make diabetes. It's not my fault my kid has it. Just because I have, I don't know, a thyroid problem doesn't mean I gave it to my kids. That's genetics. You know what I mean? Like, I've never once heard somebody say, "Oh, it's my fault they have blonde hair."
Yeah.
Right. But your kid gets diabetes, and all of a sudden, oh, my grandmother has celiac. This is my fault. That's just silly. So, but it's how people feel.
Well, yeah, because I think going back to our, your instinctive protective feelings, as a parent, you feel like you should do all the things that you can do to protect your child from experiencing pain. And with a chronic illness diagnosis, you feel like, what did I not do to protect them? How could I prevent this? And then you realize, you go through the process of acceptance. Like, okay, I accept that I was not able to, I didn't control this diagnosis. And then maybe if you lean towards those thoughts and feelings, okay, well, now I need to do everything I can to prevent them from having any complications. And you're driven by that fear. which then drives all of your actions and responses.
So,
Mhm.
so if you have a kid and the kid can't hit a baseball, you don't feel guilty that the kid can't hit a baseball. You take him out, you buy him a tee, you try to teach him how to swing. It all feels like it's accomplishable. Maybe with diabetes, the guilt comes because at the end of this path, you are not going to find a magic wand that gets rid of diabetes. I wonder if guilt doesn't push the philanthropy around diabetes even. Like that feeling of like, I can't cure this. Let me try to help the bigger picture. Because it's really interesting. Everything that comes up in your life, if you're reasonably healthy, I think you will believe you can overcome it, or that there may be a path out of it, and that, not giving up might be the answer. But there's nothing about a disease that gives you that feeling.
Well, and I think, that interesting, like, does guilt drive the philanthropy? I'm going to do all that I can to protect my child.
Right.
I would say yes. And with that is the fear, right? Like the fear of wanting to protect your child even further from further pain.
Mm-hmm.
And I think what you were saying earlier, the odds are good that your child's going to be okay if you're doing all the things as best to your ability, and the fear can be driving the guilt as well, along with, this, I'm going to do all I can as best I can. And then also, to prevent the guilt, I'm going to practice some self-compassion, right, and be kind to myself when we over-bolused or corrected too strongly, and we're going to learn from that.
I wonder, there are times when I wonder if my ability to let it go, if that's not actually, I don't know what the word would be, like some sort of a defense mechanism, or if it's not like an overabundance of self-confidence that maybe I don't even deserve, or whatever. You know what I mean? Like that idea of like, I couldn't have done anything about this. It's not my fault. And that, because you can look at that a different way. Like I do believe that I examined that situation and a number of them before. And I said, okay, this is what happened here. Here's my mistake, okay. Then this happened. And then here's where I pulled my back together again, and I got back on course, and then it's how we fix this. So as much as I might have been, and the fault, and I'm using quotes around fault, is just that there were too many variables, and I was distracted on top of that, right? And so I just didn't. There were just again, I'll be able to talk about it at some point, but. There were too many things going on. It got beyond my ability, and I did not know that was happening. And as soon as it became a dire focused situation again, and I was able to shut out surrounding, variables, I was back to the person I needed to be in that situation, and blah, 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 and we're good. So, but isn't that life though?
Yes.
Things are happening constantly, and how do you give your full attention to something? And isn't it easy for, I don't know, like, I mean, there's such a randomness to things.
Well, I think also, like, perhaps you get comfortable in the management. And while I'm not a caregiver to a child with type 1, I am a parent. And I think, just aside from the caregiver guilt with diabetes, you're making decisions, and you're kind of going through the motions of the evening, and then you let your child do something you wouldn't normally have them do, and then you feel like, oh, I shouldn't have done that, or I shouldn't have said that, and then you kind of check yourself and say, oh, okay, I was not focused, or as you said, there were all these other kind of variables, and you were tired, maybe you're planning something, and I get like the caregiver fear or the guilt around, wow, I bolus too much, and now my child is low, and I'm fearful that, are they going to have a seizure in a result of something that I did? I gave them X amount of units.
Right.
I mean, that is real fear. And I get that can be real guilt. And just in those moments to just try, to, as you're being aware of, like, oh yes, I do feel that guilt. And I've seen y'all post about it too. And then the next step is, gosh, I made a mistake, and that was really scary. My child's okay, thankfully. And I'm going to move forward, and I'm going to be kind to myself. And then I get to practice. I get to model that for my child too, to say, wow, we made it,
right.
We over bolused, and then we made a mistake, and that was scary.
Life
but we're okay.
I hate to say, life is like the the spinning plates trick at a stage show. Like you put a stick up, you get a plate spinning on it, and then they run over and they grab another stick and they stand it up and they get another plate spinning, and they get as many spinning plates as they can. And then they basically are running back and forth from plate to plate, keeping them spinning so they don't fall off. I almost think of that as like autopilot sometimes. Like you were talking about, like even with regular parenting, like sometimes just something's going well, and so you take your attention away from it. But one day, right? Like the plate, you're not going to make it back to that plate. And then it's going to crash down. You're going to have to start over again. We used to have this joke we told about my youngest brother. We used to say Rob is either in trouble or getting in trouble, and you haven't found out about it yet.
Yeah.
he had two states of trouble. It was happening currently, or he was putting it into motion. And so, and that's just sort of, you've got all those plates spinning, and while you're spinning the one, it's hard not to stand there and think the third plate from the right needs attention. And I can't do all of this. And I do think that being a good parent is going to constantly put you in that feeling. Right. And so the real truth is, I think you have to be able to stand there and reconcile with yourself. One of these plates is going to fall. My job isn't to keep them all spinning. My job is to keep as many of them as possible from falling. And maybe we'll get lucky, and the ones that crash down aren't the real expensive ones. And right. But there's no, I don't know. I think that there's comfort in knowing that there's no perfection.
Yes.
That's all. I mean, that's what I'm comforted by.
Yeah. You cannot expect perfection in yourself as a parent, as a person living with type 1. That obviously then leads to all the, the distress and the shame. And I think just, it happens even, myself with type 1, I'll be trying to juggle multiple things, and I'll mindlessly bolus and realize, oh my goodness, or I'll bolus twice sometimes because I have forgotten, and there's so many things going on. I say, oh, well, now I'm going to correct for that. And I'm going to be more mindful next time. Yeah. It happens.
People do that thing where they're MDI, and the end of the night, it's time for them to give themselves 10, 15, 20 units of basal insulin, and they just grab their fast acting insulin instead and put it in. I see a post about that monthly.
I will, hopefully he's okay with my brother who also has type 1. He was at home with his children while his wife was away for the weekend. And he was, he's a very hands-on dad, but I think this contributed. He was, managing all the bedtime routine. He gave himself his, he wears a Dexcom, but does MDI. And he gave himself his whatever, 10 units of Lantus, and then did it again an hour later. Had forgot 10 because he just, juggling. And then he was, poor thing was up eating all night long. But it happens. And then you get to, you probably feel badly, and you say, well, I made a mistake, and I'm going to practice being a little bit more mindful next time. And that's okay.
I think my point about all this is just that most days it's going to be, oh, hold on. None of this is going to matter if I die while I'm making the podcast.
You're going to make it?
Yeah. Am I going to? I don't know. Maybe. I ran out of hot. Hold on a second. Let me have a drink. I think my point is that whether it's life or diabetes or anything in between, it's all not going to go right. And you doing emotional damage to yourself when you don't need to, because something that was never going to be perfect anyway isn't perfect. you really are doing yourself and your family and the people around you a disservice. Now, you might not be doing it on purpose, but you can recognize it on purpose and try to help yourself on purpose. I'm not saying you're ever going to get rid of it completely, but big stuff, right? Like it's almost like diabetes, like chopping out the lows and the highs and trying to find less variability, whether it's in your mental health, your day-to-day life, or type 1 diabetes. That's really what's most important. You're not trying to live with a blood sugar of 85 forever. Your blood sugar may get low, it may get high. The key is to recognize it before it gets out of whack and bring it back again. So if you've listened to the podcast, that's how I talk about diabetes. And if you're really paying attention to the podcast, you know that I talk about diabetes the way I think about being alive. And so, I mean, I'm not the end all be all on anything, but I think you just shave off the highs, shave off the lows, try to stay in the middle as much as you can. And that's well done. You know?
Yes. And no, and then, learning how to course correct. I think, when you think about it in the mental health perspective, the term, being mentally, having mental health fitness, that doesn't mean that you're going to be happy all the time. It means, or having a straight line all the time. Right. It means, okay, you recognize when you're feeling low or when that, the feelings are kind of becoming consuming, and then knowing how to course correct. Does it mean going out, talking to a friend, exercising, reaching out for help from the mental health professional, doing some yoga and mindfulness, accepting those challenging thoughts? It's, understanding how to get back to, as you say, in the middle, less highs, less lows. I think the same thing can be applied to being, having that mental health fitness, and it takes practice.
Yeah, it really does. I shudder to think that I was going to say it's about the journey, not the destination, but but it really is.
It is.
It is. I mean, and my kid asked me the other day, like, what's the key to life? Like, what's the most important things in life? And I answered differently than I would have answered 10 years ago, and maybe differently than I would have answered 20 years before that. And I just said, it's health. It's achieving the best level of health that you can. I was like, everything else is secondary. People who are healthy and don't have, well, we're all dying, right? But people who don't have, people who don't have day-to-day knowledge of the deterioration of their body, those people have, I mean, I'd pay for that. You know what I mean? Like, I'm not even saying that they're super healthy and I'm not, or my daughter's not, or etc. I'm just saying that they're not aware of their mortality constantly. And if that's a gift I would love to give somebody, like, because it's all going to end, reasonably the same for everybody. But knowing it's happening as it's happening sucks. And then that makes every decision, every mistake, it just feels so much bigger because you know the outcome suddenly, right? Like you have cause and effect that's been laid out in front of you by a doctor, by your experiences. If I do this, if I don't use enough insulin, my blood sugar is going to get high and my body's going to deteriorate quickly. If I use too much insulin, my blood sugar is going to get low. I might have a seizure. I might die. When a person has a beer at a bar, they don't think about their liver. You know what I mean? Right. When you smoke a cigarette at a club, but you're not really a smoker, you don't think, oh, I probably just lost 3 minutes of my life. It's you don't have to have those thoughts, and therefore you don't get the guilt from it. I think. I don't know. I could be, Erica, these conversations are basically about me being wrong and you telling me I'm wrong.
Well, I'm still just impressed that one of your children asked, what's the key to life?
Well, I think he thought it was money, by the way.
Oh.
But he's just fresh from college, a couple days from his graduation, and he's sitting around trying to figure out what to do next.
Yes.
And he's like, well, what's the most important thing? What's the thing I should be focused on? And he said, like, it's money. And I was like, it's not. It's health. It's health and security and the access to clean, good food. Like that's what it's about. It's about love and connections and, caring about somebody more than you care about yourself. I think that's what I think life's about.
Yes. And being kind to yourself in the process as you navigate all of that.
Yeah. Right. Not doing the martyr thing, which came up earlier and we never really talked about it, but happens constantly. I see, listen, I hate to say it, I see people online constantly doing that. They just like everything's going wrong, but I'm trying so hard. This would all fall apart without me. Like that whole thing. You guys don't understand. Like that's, I don't know. I'm sure that's a completely different topic, but it's common. I see it done commonly.
Yeah. Well, and I think, that is kind of going into, is that a component, a part of, the diabetes distress, feeling powerless in the process of the management, whether you're the caregiver or the person with type 1? Is it, are you getting a lot of attention as a result of that?
Yeah.
And is that meeting an unmet need that you're not getting elsewhere? I think there are probably many different ways. Is it learned? Is it you're not aware? There's no self-awareness of how often you're feeling that guilt and posting or talking about it.
It looks like a coping mechanism to me. It looks like somebody saying, I can't affect the outcome. And knowing that is making me crazy. So I'm going to pretend that we're doing everything right. So it's almost like, what did those people do? They played music on the deck of the Titanic while it was sinking. Like that's what it feels like to me. It's like, all right, look, this boat's going to sink. I don't want to think about it till my ass hits the water. So I'm going to project this confidence. And I find it, I'm going to be honest with you. I see people do it in the space. I don't think I think it's not just not valuable. I think it's detrimental. I would, for me, I'd rather face something head on, do my best to defeat it. If it kills me, it kills me. But I'm not going to shut my eyes and hope it doesn't get me. You know what I mean? So, yeah.
So it is, as you said, is it a coping mechanism in terms of trying to avoid, is it avoiding kind of the fear, or is it avoiding, the truth of whatever other emotion? And so it just feels easier over time to kind of put your hands in the air, defeatist, powerless. Those are all, that can all be associated with just having type 1 or diabetes too. So I think it's tricky to specifically categorize it, but probably all of those things.
Right. Oh, I think in some way or another, we've mentioned pretty much every reaction to diabetes that I've seen other people have.
Yes.
It's either I can do it, or let's pretend it's going to be okay, or this is a shit show and I give up and let's light the whole thing on, let's light the whole thing on fire and see how long. I'll tell you what, going back 20 years, and this, you've had diabetes for 3 decades or more.
Yes.
Before all this technology and the good insulin and the glucose monitors, this was basically live fast, die young, leave a good looking corpse. Like a lot of people took that perspective with diabetes.
Yeah. It was, 2 or 3 injections a day, if that, prick your finger 3 to 4 times and hope for the best. That was 32, it'll be 32 years this summer.
Right. But there are people who I've interviewed a number of them. They were just like, I knew this wasn't going to be, I was going to be dead. That's what I thought. So I lived like that. And there were no real tools to do anything with. Then they somehow lived long enough for the tools to get better. And then it slowed their progression down. And now they live with a lot of complications. I think that this right here in this time period might be the last generation of type 1s who started in a different management time and ended in a more advanced one. Like, I think,
yes.
You know what I mean? Going forward, everyone's going to start, hopefully, I don't want to curse, but insurance and, having access aside, people who have access should not experience those outcomes with as much frequency. I think.
Yes. And I recently just saw some stats on that. I'm not going to repeat them because I don't want to say it incorrectly, but the percentage of complications from people who were diagnosed, I think it was 30 to 40 years ago versus like in the last 10 years, the percentage has decreased so significantly. It was very encouraging to see. And so maybe I'll find those stats. So next time I can report that, because it was pretty amazing. And I think, as a lot of people do say, well, you never want to be diagnosed with diabetes. Now is a good time, this, age and era of technology and community. Really, those are two significant factors
for physical and mental health.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I can't tell you how much I believe in it and the community side of it. And it's the truth be told, like it's not something that I even thought about in the beginning. Like I just
the community aspect of this
and the value I see for people with it.
Yes,
even you've heard me say before, like I thought of the podcast as like a management podcast, and a great many people that listen to it think of it as a community. And
I mean, the Facebook page is definitely evidence of that.
Yeah. I want to say
it's pretty incredible.
Well, yeah, I agree. I think it is. It's the right place. Right thing at the right time really worked out. So listen, if I was going to be like a coach at the end and yell rah, 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 and like, go get them boys and everything like that, what I would tell you is whether you're being shamed by somebody or you're feeling guilt, it's taking up your time. It's taking up your compute cycles. It's probably making you feel terrible. Turn it into action. Like, don't waste that time on something that's got no end if you can help it. And if you can't help it, go find somebody that can help you. Like, you might need mental health tools. Maybe you don't have them. Like, maybe you get from the podcast, bolusing tools and that. But what we were just talking about the possibility of being healthy for a lifetime with diabetes, like, focus on that. Like, if you want to make yourself crazy about something, make yourself crazy about that, not about, woe is me, this is all over, here we go. Like, you know what I mean? Like, it's just, this isn't what I wanted. It's not what I expected. Like, you got to get past that part. Like, something else was going to happen. Like, life's never what you expect. I mean, Erica, is your life the way you expected it was going to be?
No, it's not. I know you've said before too, like, you don't have a child expecting that they're going to be diagnosed with something or have a major challenge. You give birth to a child and hope that everything will be perfect.
Yeah, you're giving birth to the center fielder for the Yankees, like right now. Yeah. Like, it's this little girl's going to dance on blah, blah, blah. Everybody's going to be brilliant and so it didn't work out quite like that. No reason to give up. You're still here.
Right.
You're still here.
Right.
This is your shot. You know what I mean? Like,
that's right.
I don't know. I say swing.
There's a season for all of it, and to kind of understand there are seasons. And I hear you say, like, try and push through that and move forward and get the help that you need.
Yeah. No, whatever.
When you're feeling stuck in that,
whatever it is, because that stuck feeling, that, like, I mean, it's just, it's the devil, right? Like, I mean, you get into this place where you're just like, it's comfortable. You see it with eating sometimes. Like, people start off, get into a poor eating cycle, and then they lean into it. It's comfortable, right? The carbs get a hold of you. You're like, oh, sugar, fat, I love this. You know what I mean? Like, and you're like, oh, I'm gaining weight. I don't feel as well. Whatever. You can't. You almost can't even make yourself care. It's intoxicating.
Yeah. Shame it can be really cruel and nasty like that.
Yeah. So
when you're attuned to it.
So if someone comes to you and exhibits these either shame or guilt around diabetes, where do you lead them first? Like, give them an idea of what would happen if they reached out to a mental health professional.
I first would applaud them and commend them for reaching out, because it's often the hardest thing to do, because you've recognized that you need help, and it can be scary to take that first step. So I would commend them on that, taking that first bold step. And then we would spend time practicing that self-awareness around how frequently are you feeling those thoughts of probably shame at that point. What are the triggers? Is it around a specific issue? Is it global? Shame, you're not a good enough parent, you're not a good enough coworker, you're not a good enough spouse. Sometimes can be specific in all of the roles that you play in life. It could also be global. So we would spend some time kind of recognizing that. And then maybe moving into some mindfulness of accepting that there will be moments, kind of all the things that we've talked about. There will be moments where I feel guilty, and not placing judgment around that, acknowledging it, accepting some of those thoughts and feelings, and then moving into more healing and kind of corrective work around changing your thoughts. Yeah. And getting the support that you need. I think because shame does lead to isolation and it likes to keep you there. And so by stepping out, getting help with a mental health professional, stepping out into being more open about it with your family and friends, and just feeling less isolated in that is one of the best tools as well, that you're not alone in that space.
I would think that it's probably important to recognize that, guilt and shame they're not things that you get when something goes wrong. Everybody has them. You know what I mean? Like to sit here and think, oh, I do feel very guilty, or, about my kid getting diabetes, or I am ashamed of how I manage their blood sugar, that kind of thing. If you think you feel that and other people don't, that's not the case. I would think that, I'm guessing here, but I don't think you could find 1 in 1,000 people who don't feel guilt or shame. And so it's not about trying to avoid it. It's about living with it. Like you even said before, like you can use the guilt. The guilt can be a motivator. And how much of it is even shame? Like how much of it is the way you take it in versus how it comes at you? Is that controllable?
I think how much can be the way you take it in versus what was the second part?
Like the way you take it in versus how you, I don't know, like how you respond to it, I guess. Like if somebody tried to make me feel ashamed about something, they couldn't do that. Like I wouldn't allow it.
Right. Cause you have the built-in self-talk.
Right. And
whether by, nature and nurture, you do.
And if I should feel ashamed about something, I'm already aware of it. I don't need.
You've already led yourself there.
Yeah, don't worry. I've thought about it already, and so yeah, Scott's got it all covered. I know what I've done wrong. Okay, so it's like you can't do that to me. I've already, and I think that's a preemptive way of handling your mental health, which is you can't ignore things. You just sort of have to look at them, assess them, be honest with yourself, and say, all right, well, we're all still alive. I got to keep going. You know what I mean? Like now, if I stand up and do something heinous right now, maybe I can't get past that. But I live my life very simply. I'm gonna tell you something. When my kids asked me what the key to life is when they were younger, I said, well, here's what I do. I don't lie unless I have to. And I treat people the way I want to be treated as often as I can. And I don't feel bad about anything that doesn't follow those two rules. I am doing I'm doing my best. I have good intentions every day. And so if something doesn't go right or my intentions can't cover everyone, well, then that's what it is. I'm not going to sit back here and feel badly about it. And if somebody doesn't, to be more specific, if there are people who listen to this podcast who don't like it, and some of them are happy to tell me, and I read their reviews and I think, well, it's not for them. I never once think I should stop doing this. And I see who it helps. It helps more people than it doesn't help. It's a valuable thing. I wouldn't spend 5 seconds worrying about the alternative.
Well, and that is a result also of boundaries, right? Of having healthy boundaries around your mindset.
Yeah. What do I care? Listen, Erica, I don't want to be, but let me just say this. Think of all the people you know. How many of them do you trust? So what are you going to start worrying about people you don't know for coming and saying things to you? I saw something in the Facebook group recently that was, it happens once in a while. Like someone, I'm going to give a very generalized, like someone comes on and describes, this is a cat. And then someone says, yes, that is a cat. And they go, I can't believe you said that to me. Like, don't come on and tell me that, my family treats me like this. And when somebody else says, wow, your family is terrible. Don't go, you can't speak about my family like that. I was like, well, you came here, you described a terrible situation. And now I'm agreeing with you and trying to support you. And suddenly you don't want me to tell you the cat's a cat. Like, well, then I don't know what to do here. And I never feel that way. Like, I just feel like, just be honest and take honest responses from people. Take the ones you want. Like, I'm not going to tell you that there haven't been some reviews that I've read and I thought, that person's right. I mean, if you if you don't go back and listen to 8 years of this podcast and see that in 2022, that the split of me speaking to the guest speaking is more 50-50 than it was in the beginning. Well, you're not, I've learned from that. You know what I'm saying?
Uh-huh.
So, I mean, somebody said that to me years ago, like, dude, you talk too much. And at first I was like, all right, fair enough. I'll see what I can do about it. So I don't know.
Yeah. You're open. Like, again, that's the boundaries, like of knowing when is it appropriate to let something in and when is it not?
Yeah.
And I think that the Facebook post you just described, that maybe that feels like, I think just going back to the awareness of if you are feeling a certain emotion, I know we're talking specifically about guilt here, but and if you're posting something and you're responding differently, then maybe that person was looking for something different, right? And a need was not met in that other person's response. But just going back to the awareness of, gosh, I'm posting so much about this guilt and it's not changing. I think that really is the first step in trying to help yourself, but also normalizing and validating for yourself that it's going to happen.
Right. I want to say too that, as we use examples from like a Facebook group, that people could be like, oh, that's online. Trust me, I've been looking at it for years. It is a reflection of how people feel. It's actually a more honest reflection of how they feel because they feel anonymous to some degree. And so this is their one chance to get this unburden themselves sometimes. It's forget it being a Facebook post. It's a person's thought, and then it's how they respond to other people around them. I don't know. My point was that people don't have real control over how you feel if you don't let them. And I don't know the secret to that. I just know it's true. Like there are probably, I was talking to somebody recently, and you probably have to go. But I was talking to somebody recently who runs another Facebook group. And they said, I don't like it when people speak poorly about my Facebook group. And I was like, why do you care? I said, aren't you're helping all these people, right? And they said, yeah. I said, well, so somebody doesn't like the way you do it. Like, who cares? And I said, don't you think that there are other people in the world who don't agree with you? And I said, you're just not aware of them. But they don't. It's the same. It's just like when my kids asked me about like when cyberbullying first happened, like you don't think of it, but as technology changes, things, happen in the zeitgeist that become more real. Cyberbullying is one of those things. I told my kids, I was like, don't look, it doesn't exist. And I'm like, what? I was like, there could be someone in the backyard right now telling, I don't know, the birds what an asshole I am. I don't hear them. It ain't happening. So like, and I said, now if it becomes real in your life, you know what I mean? Like that's obviously a different story. But the idea that everyone's going to like you or agree with you, I don't even know why people would expect that. Like, have I ever told you how when I first met my wife, she said, do you know some people really don't like you?
I don't know if you shared that with me.
Yeah, she goes, some people love you and some people really don't like you. And I said, yeah, I know. And she used a person as an example. And it was a person that I generally don't have a lot of respect for to begin with. I didn't know they didn't like me, but they're a person like I would not model myself after. And my answer to her was, what would it say about me if he did like me? I'm glad he doesn't like me. I mean, looking at who he is, that's not the kind of person I would want to agree with who I am. And I don't know. I've just felt like that since I was young. Anyway.
So that's those are your boundaries and kind of protective measures.
But I don't deserve them, Erica. I don't deserve them any more or less than someone else does, which makes me feel like anyone could put themselves in that position. I just don't know how to tell them to do it. I don't know.
Well, yes. But I think I know we could keep going, but I think it's just over your lifetime too. You've learned how to protect yourself in those ways, just based on the anecdotes I've heard over our times together. Yeah.
Your hands up, Erica, bob and weave. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
That's all. Just pay attention to where the swings are coming from and just get out of the way.
That's right.
I don't know. Anyway, I wish everybody a ton of luck. This is an incredibly serious thing. Guilt is horrible. Shame feels horrible. I hope you can find a way not to get sucked into that vortex. And I don't know. Good luck.
Yes. You're not alone, and reach out for help.
Go wherever you can. Erica only works in California because laws. But she can help you virtually. EricaForsyth.com,
Yes.
right?
Yes, that's right.
Yeah. If you're a
Yes.
California resident, or there have to be somebody in your local area must have went to college and paid attention enough to help you. Go find that person.
Yeah. Oh, thank you.
A huge thank you to one of today's sponsors, Gvoke Glucagon. Find out more about Gvoke HypoPen at gvokeglucagon.com/juicebox. You spell that GVOKEGLUCAGON.com/juicebox. To get started today with US Med, go to usmed.com/juicebox or call 888-721-1514. Your diabetes supplies, well, that can be an easy thing. Doesn't have to be a pain. Try US Med. Often your blood glucose meter just gets given to you by a doctor, but you have a choice, and you can get a great one at contournext.com/juicebox. Thanks so much to the Contour Next One blood glucose meter for sponsoring this episode of the Juicebox Podcast. We mentioned it in the episode, but if you live in California and you'd like to use Erica, she got a website, ericaforsyth.com. Go check her out. She really is terrific. And you know what? The Facebook page got mentioned a lot during this episode. It's a private group. It has 25,000 people in it now. Juicebox Podcast, Type 1 Diabetes. You have to answer a couple of questions just so the algorithm over at Facebook knows you're a real person, and then you're right in. Juicebox Podcast, Type 1 Diabetes. Absolutely fantastic group. I'm incredibly proud of it, and I think it might be valuable to you. I think that's about it for today. Thank you so much for listening. I'll be back very soon with another episode of the Juicebox Podcast. Please remember to take care of your mental health as well as your physical health. It's all very important, and one helps the other.